Good morning, U.S. history students. Today we're doing our last set of notes for U.S. history. Notes 7.4, President Obama to today. Your essential question: what effect has the Obama administration had on the United States? So President Obama came into office in 2008. He faced a huge recession in the economy. So in the United States, we had a sharp decline in economic activity. We had massive house foreclosures. So we had this housing bubble. People had a lot of debt. The government encouraged people to get homes even though they couldn't afford it. So a lot of people were struggling to make sure that they could pay their basic mortgage payments. So people borrow money from banks in order to be able to get home loans. And so a lot of people argued that we should bail out the banks because they were too big to fail. If these banks failed, people would lose their money. But a lot of people believed that banks didn't need to be bailed out. They were the ones responsible for handing out these loans to people who couldn't afford them. So the the Bush and the Obama administrations believed that banks were too big to fail and that it would really harm the economy if we did not protect them. So, unfortunately, they did bail out these banks and they were able to keep the banks open, which is a good thing. Um, the unemployment rate went from 5% to 10%. The values of houses plummeted and the stock market crashed as well. The government was also struggling because we had less income from taxes. So the government started requiring people to have furlough days. So government officials would force people to take unpaid days off work. They cut programs in schools, they laid off teachers, they had bigger class sizes. The 2008 election was an election unlike we've seen before in U.S. history. This was an election where the Democrats, in their primary election, the two frontrunners were a woman and an African American man. For the frontrunners of the Democratic Party, this was the first time in history. President Obama ran on hope and change, and candidate Clinton, Senator Clinton, she faced sexism that was seen as more socially acceptable than racism against Obama. She faced people at her campaigns going around chanting "Iron my shirt" at her, requiring her or asking her to do her womanly duties and take care of the home. People called her sexist names, definitely didn't treat her equally. There's plenty of videos about it online. We're not going to go into all that today. But she faced a lot of sexism in that campaign. She ended up losing the primary election to President Obama. Obama would go on to run the election, the general election in November, against John McCain from Arizona. President Obama at the time had won the largest percent of the popular vote for a Democrat since LBJ way back in 1964. So President Obama would be our president from 2009 till 2016. This was his first inauguration, was a massive night of inspiring change for the United States. We had elected our first African American president, and his vice president was Joe Biden, who is going to be our president starting next January. So in his first inaugural address in 2009, he was trying to unify the country. He knew that we were facing a lot of problems. When he came into office, he had to deal with a Great Recession, so the terrible economy. He had to deal with healthcare reform. So at this time, we had a lot of issues with our healthcare. We still do have a lot of issues with our healthcare, but back then you could deny someone healthcare insurance if they had pre-existing conditions. So if anyone had previously been sick before, you could deny them healthcare. They were denying healthcare to survivors of the 9/11 attacks. He wanted to increase minimum wage. He wanted to help out the economy, help out people for unemployment insurance and food stamps. So he decided to focus on the Affordable Care Act, which was healthcare in 2009. In 2009, the Affordable Care Act decided they were going to require insurance companies to offer people health insurance. Doesn't matter if they have a pre existing condition or not. They said you could not deny someone health care insurance if they had pre existing condition. They said that if you have children and your job provides your children with health insurance, you have to keep providing that health insurance until they turn 26 years old. It required everyone to have health insurance and provided financial assistance to those who could not afford to pay for their own health care. In 2011, he was involved with the conflict. Obviously, the president is the commander in chief, so the president is responsible for the military. And he led the military to go ahead and have the United States Navy SEAL Team 6 kill Osama bin Laden. He would be reelected in 2012. President Obama was reelected when he ran against Mitt Romney in 2012. In his inaugural address in 2013, he said, "We, the people, declare today that the most evident of truths that all of us are created equal. The star that guides us still, just as it guided us, our forebears through Seneca Falls," which, if you remember, Seneca Falls was the first women's rights convention, and Selma, where we had that march for civil rights on that bridge, and Stonewall, which was the start of the LGBTQ movement, just as it guided all those men and women. So the fact that the president had acknowledged women's rights and civil rights and the LGBTQ community in his inaugural speech was a really big deal at the time because no president had ever done that before. President Obama also got to nominate 2 people for the Supreme Court. Sonia Sotomayor, who became the first Latina Supreme Court Justice, and then Elena Kagan. So 2 women he put on the Supreme Court. In 2016, in March of 2016, he nominated Merrick Garland, but he was not able to even get a hearing for Merrick Garland because the Republicans controlled Congress and they refused to approve anyone. So this seat remained open for over a year. They said it was an election year. It was March, so the next president wouldn't take office for another 10 months, but they said that the next president should be able to choose that Supreme Court justice, and so they refused to approve anyone. And then President Trump got to do this in 2018. He did this with Brett Kavanaugh. Now the same thing would happen this year in 2020. Ruth Bader Ginsburg would pass away in the fall of this year, and the election was just 2 months away when she passed away. The next president wouldn't take office again until January, but the Republicans instead, this time, they said that they needed to pass it through and they needed to have a new Supreme Court justice. They couldn't leave that seat open for a few months, even though they left it open for over a year with the Obama administration. President Obama also continued the war on terror. He used more drones than any president previously in history. He used drones because that was a military aircraft that could be flown without actually having a person inside of it, but that increased casualties. So without having a person actually in the plane, just having a person control it remotely, they killed much more innocent civilians that way. He did officially end the war in Iraq in 2011 and limited the troops in Afghanistan. He left it up to President Trump to finish, and we still do have some troops in Afghanistan today. He also got involved in the Syrian civil war. So he got involved on one side of the Syrian civil war, and President Putin and Russia got involved in the other side of the Syrian civil war. So this comic here shows you the world was watching as both of us just contributed to the chaos and destruction happening in that country. President Obama also restored U.S. relations with Cuba. So it was the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, so since President John F. Kennedy, that the United States citizens were able to go to Cuba, visit Cuba, trade with Cuba, buy Cuban goods. In 2016, they ended the embargo against Cuba, and now the United States and Cuba can work together again. And no president has done more for LGBTQ rights than President Barack Obama. He lifted the ban on LGBTQ people serving openly in the military, so he said that gay, straight, trans, anyone can serve in the military. The trans population would have an overturn of that under the Trump administration, unfortunately, but this was massive change during President Barack Obama's time. He also prevented the federal government from discriminating against people for their sexual orientation. And marriage equality became the law of the land under his administration. So this wasn't a decision he had anything over, it was a Supreme Court decision. But the Supreme Court decided that all states should have marriage equality. And so we have marriage equality in all 50 states from 2015. The night that that happened, President Obama go ahead and turned on these lights in front of the White House. These are the colors of the LGBTQ pride flag. And a lot of people were very excited about that, but a lot of people also were very offended that President Obama would do that. But he was the first sitting president to speak out for LGBTQ rights. He said, when all Americans are treated equal, no matter who they are or whom they love, we are all more free. So he also had an impact on education. He ended No Child Left Behind, which was the annual testing under the Bush administration. They changed education and now we have Common Core. Common Core focuses on literacy in education. So in every single subject, now you have literacy, which is why you have to read more in your math classes, which I know a lot of students don't like. President Obama's wife, Michelle Obama, or First Lady Michelle Obama, she started a Let's Move campaign to fight childhood obesity. And President Obama also changed student loans. So now when you get a student loan out for college, you can start paying that loan back as you earn. So it's never going to be more than 10% of your income that you have to pay back. President Obama also had DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This changed the process for immigration for people who came here as undocumented immigrants as minors. So young people who came here before the age of 17, this provided them protection so they wouldn't be deported back to a country that they didn't know. It also gave them the ability to get a driver's license in Medi-Cal in California. And in California, we have the DREAM Act. This was something that was suggested in the federal government, but it never got passed. But the DREAM Act in California, this provides undocumented students the ability to have financial aid for college, so scholarships, student loans, things like that. They're able to get in-state tuition. They're able to, get jobs, get driver's licenses, all of those things in the state of California. And in case you haven't looked into the Obama-Biden memes, I would check that out. It was something that was really popular in 2016. They're pretty funny. President Obama and Joe Biden are really good friends. They're still friends to this day. Right before President Obama left office, he gave Joe Biden the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And this was just a fun video from President Obama.
Prune. The deadline for signing up for health insurance is February.
Not like any other Wednesday.
That's not right.
Wednesday.
February 15th. February 15th. In many cases, you can get health insurance for less than $100 a month. Just go to healthcare.gov to figure out how to sign up. February 15th.
Oh. Thanks, Obama.
Thanks, Obama.
It's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Seconds left in the game. Down by 1. He gets it. Mr. President?
Can I live?
You do you.
YOLO, man.
So President Obama was really the first president to use social media as a way to communicate with people. President Trump would take this up as well, and he would use it in a very different way. So in 2016, we had the election of President Trump. President Trump lost the popular vote by 3 million votes, becoming the 5th US president in history to lose the popular vote, but still win the Electoral College. So this would happen in 1824, 76, 88, in 2000, and 2016. But the Electoral College is what decides the presidential election. So the Electoral College, we had 306 votes for Trump and 232 for Clinton. So that would be the exact same in 2020, but it would be reversed. He had a very contentious campaign when he was running. He first ran and decided he was going to run by criticizing Mexico. So when he announced that he was running for president, he said Mexico was sending their worst people to the United States when they were immigrating here. He said that immigrants from Mexico were bringing drugs and crime, and they were rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. So a lot of people were very, very offended by that. He also was caught on tape bragging about sexually assaulting women, and he called it locker room talk. But this did not prevent people from still voting for him. He was also very offended when he first became president about the crowd size at the inauguration. So this was the inauguration of President Obama. Of course, a big difference, our first African-American president, but this was the inauguration of President Trump in 2017. President Trump was able to fill 3 Supreme Court vacancies in his presidential time. He was able to nominate Neil Gorsuch in 2017, Brett Kavanaugh in 2018, and Amy Coney Barrett in 2020. The Supreme Court will now be much more conservative than courts in the past. These were 3 Republican, very conservative Supreme Court justices. President Trump would become the 3rd president to ever be impeached. He was impeached by the House of Representatives in 2019. Much like the 2 impeachments before him, Jackson and Nixon, I'm sorry, not Nixon, Nixon was going to be impeached, but he resigned. Clinton was also impeached, but he was acquitted by the Senate. Same thing happened to President Trump. So he was impeached by the House of Representatives in 2019, and then in January of 2020, he was acquitted by the Senate. We would then have the election that just happened in 2020. Again, Trump lost the popular vote. This time, he lost by 7 million votes. Last time, he lost by 3 million votes. But the Electoral College numbers were still the same. They were just flopped, actually. So instead of Trump winning 306, Trump actually won 232, and Biden won 306. So this is the Electoral College map. And then this election also made history because we now have our first female vice presidential candidate. She is going to become our first female vice president, Kamala Harris. She is also our first Indian American president and our first African American president, or vice president, I'm sorry. And that is the end of your notes for today. So don't forget to write a summary, a couple sentences about what you learned.